Hey everybody, it is Wednesday, August 28th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And for the Oasis fans out there, the two brothers, the Gallagher brothers, have made up after 15 years and allegedly have planned a tour.
If they can remain cordial until then.
If you know anything about these two, literally they've put out albums where they're fighting, physical fights, verbal fights. Oasis, one of the more well-known bands from the 90s, early 2000s, but things got so bad between the brothers, they had to break up. Now they've planned a tour over the next year. So if you're a big Oasis fan, definitely go check out your tickets to go see them abroad. But of course, as Jill says, the caveat, that is if they can keep their peace until the tour starts.
They should just not speak and be separate until then.
I'm sure they found a way this past decade and a half, but we'll have more on that, on the reunion, along with the rest of the day's news a little bit later on.
All right, now to the headlines, starting in the Middle East, where for the first time since October 7th, Israel has rescued a hostage alive from a Hamas tunnel under Gaza. In tech news, regrets, he has a few. What Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg says that he wishes he did differently in regard to COVID news and some political content. Speaking of politics, the special counsel has now revised its indictment about Trump and election interference in light of that Supreme Court ruling about presidential immunity. And it looks like the on-again, off-again debate between Harris and Trump is now back on.
Yeah, 12 days ago. Will it go off again? Unclear. But the debate over the debate, for now, Jill, is over.
As is the debate about when Harris will do her first sit-down interview with a journalist. We are learning that she has committed to an in-depth interview. Her first as the Democratic nominee. We'll tell you when, where, and with whom.
And what you guys were telling us about it over on Instagram, where we polled the audience, Jill, in the last 24 hours, as to whether American voters care about a candidate sitting down and doing interviews these days.
In medical news, a new, less expensive way for people to get those high-demand weight loss drugs. And is Generation Z Generation call-in sick? Why Gen Z is spending more time away from the office.
It's all about a healthier work-life balance, Jill.
Okay, great, Moshe. I'll see you next week.
We elder millennials were trained by the boomers not to take our time off.
Tennis, anyone? The first day of the U.S. Open set an impressive attendance record, and a 16-year-old American has pulled off a stunning U.S. Open upset. We'll tell you about it. And after all, oh my God, I shouldn't have even tried that. Oasis.
Well, they might need you if one of the brothers doesn't make it to the tour.
Oasis is reuniting after one of the nastiest feuds in rock, plus Moshe is on this day in history.
Your clue today, don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years.
Moshe. Too easy.
This is sort of peak. This is peak Jill. This is peak. This is early 90s.
Between I carried a watermelon. I'm so excited. And don't call it a comeback.
And they all fall within about a 4-year period there. So
exactly. Yeah. All right, let's start in the Middle East, where Israeli forces rescued a hostage from a tunnel in Gaza. This is the 8th hostage rescued alive by the Israeli military since the beginning of the war in 4 separate operations. But the IDF says it is the first time that a hostage has been rescued alive from inside Hamas's sprawling tunnel network underneath Gaza. That hostage is 52-year-old Qaid Farhan Al-Qadi. He is an Israeli Muslim, part of Israel's Bedouin Arab community. He has 11 children and 2 wives. He was working as an unarmed guard at a village near the Gaza border when he was abducted. The IDF says he is in stable medical condition. He was taken to a hospital in Israel where members of his large Bedouin family gathered around his bedside in a joyful reunion. You may have seen the video on social media of his family sprinting through the halls of the hospital in Israel so that they could finally see their loved one in person. His brother says, "I cannot explain these feelings. It is better than being born again." We say thank you to everyone, and we hope Farhan is good and healthy. We are very happy. Al-Qadi did speak to Israeli President Isaac Herzog from his hospital bed. He said of his rescue, Suddenly, I heard someone speaking Hebrew outside the door. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, so Israeli special forces here, several units, were acting on intelligence when they found al-Qadi. They were combing through a network of tunnels in southern Gaza near Rafah, where they found him. He was alone without his Hamas captors. There has been a breakdown of sorts when it comes to Hamas throughout this war here. And the military says that they have learned some lessons from previous operations, and they applied them to the rescue here. You might remember we told you about this earlier in the war when the Israeli military accidentally shot and killed 3 of the hostages while they were in Gaza, believing that they were Hamas terrorists. So they've applied some lessons here. We're able to save al-Qadi. He apparently was held in a number of locations over the 320 plus days that he has been held along with the other hostages since October 7th. It comes as there's growing pressure on the Prime Minister Netanyahu to make a deal to end the war and free the remaining hostages right now. With his rescue, it is now believed 104 hostages remain abducted by Hamas, including the bodies of 34 that are confirmed dead. So about 2/3 of the just over 100 are presumed to still be alive there. And it has come as there's intensive diplomatic talks here between the Biden administration, the Egyptians, the Qataris, Israel, Hamas, to try to come to a deal here. And again, the Israelis are under pressure internally from the hostage families and other folks, including some folks in the national security establishment in Israel, to wrap things up. They feel they've accomplished the main mission in Gaza, and they want to cut a deal here to bring home the hostages that are still alive. It is a painful reminder that they are still being held here now as we go into the 11th month of the war. Last week, as we told you, they recovered the bodies of 6 hostages in southern Gaza. Those bodies had bullet wounds, so it's suspected that they were killed by Hamas. And it comes as we're not only watching the situation down in Gaza, we have been watching the situation on the northern border. We told you about the escalation over the weekend. The Israelis launching a preemptive strike as Hezbollah appeared ready to launch hundreds of rockets on the central part of Israel as part of revenge for the Israeli assassination of a Hezbollah leader. That's the terror group up in Lebanon. So the Israelis launch a preemptive strike. Hezbollah returns with several hundred drones and rockets. Nearly all of them shot down by the Israelis. There was worry earlier this week that things could escalate into a larger war. Both sides do not want that. And it appears that things have de-escalated, that Hezbollah decided to declare victory. The Israelis say they were able to preempt a major strike by Hezbollah. And so that's where things stand there. At the same time, though, you have upwards of 200,000 people on the Israeli side of the border and on the Lebanese side of the border who can't return to their homes because of this cross-border skirmishes you've seen up there. So no major escalation into regional war, but still the daily skirmishes, and that's what they're looking to resolve here, though it's unlikely that gets resolved until the Gaza situation gets resolved, because Hezbollah is doing their attacks as an attempt to show support for Hamas while that war continues.
Okay, now to a big story in the worlds of tech and politics. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg says that he now regrets how his social media platforms caved to the Biden administration pressure to censor content during the height of COVID. Zuckerberg oversees platforms like Facebook and Instagram. In a letter Monday to members of Congress, he said that the government interference was, quote, wrong, and that he plans to push back if it ever happens again. So again, this was part of a letter that Zuckerberg wrote to the House Judiciary Committee. It was in response to the House's investigation into content moderation on online platforms. Republicans leading the panel celebrated the admission yesterday. In his letter, Zuckerberg detailed how senior Biden administration officials pushed the company to censor certain posts about COVID-19, including humor and satire, and then expressed a lot of frustration when the social media platform resisted. Zuckerberg wrote, "I believe that the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. I feel strongly we should not compromise our content standards due to pressure from any administration in either direction. And we're ready to push back if something like this happens again."
Yeah, we posted this letter over on the Instagram account, incidentally, social media platform operated by Zuckerberg. He says that ultimately decisions made about whether to take content down was Meta's decision. It was their call at the end of the day, but they would do things differently this time around with the benefit of hindsight. Again, frustrated with the pressure that he felt from Washington. He also, in that letter, expressed regret for temporarily hiding content related to coverage by the New York Post. You might remember the story in October of 2020 about Hunter Biden. The story had come out about his laptop, about his connections to Ukraine. And the FBI at the time, along with a number of national security officials, warned that this may be part of a Russian disinformation campaign to try to change the election. Remember, they're learning the lessons from 2016 when there was a Russian disinformation campaign to try to sow discord within the U.S. So in 2020, there was this warning weeks out. And you heard this from Biden officials saying, whoa, that's not real. That's Russian disinformation. Well, it does turn out that it was Hunter Biden's laptop. He had compromising pictures of him, information, drugs, other things depicted in photos and videos on that laptop. And so now Zuckerberg wrote, it has since been made clear that that reporting was not Russian disinformation. And in retrospect, we should not have demoted the story. At the time, Meta said, we'll wait for third-party verification. Again, learning the lessons from 2016. Now, in retrospect, what they did in 2020, he regrets, and he says that this go around, and of course, we're less than 70 days out from this election, Meta will take a different approach here. So Republicans on the committee, as you mentioned, led by Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan, celebrated the letter, calling it a big win for free speech, this admission by Meta that they should have done things differently. This letter to Jordan does show that Meta is attempting to mend fences here with the political right ahead of this election. There has been this years-long ongoing Republican-led investigation into content moderation. We've told you about some of the Supreme Court cases. They have taken things to court. Some states like Florida and Texas have been pushing back on social media companies. And so you see Zuckerberg here trying to mend fences, trying to appeal to conservative users. Recently, he did compliment Donald Trump and his response to the assassination attempt as, quote, badass. He's gone on some more right-wing podcasts. And Zuckerberg has gone on some more right-wing, free speech-minded podcasts of late, among them Joe Rogan in the last year. So Zuckerberg trying to mend fences here, trying to appeal to conservative users. He recently did compliment Trump's response to the assassination attempt as badass. He's also tried to go on some podcasts that are listened to by some more conservative Americans. It comes as President Biden and other Democratic leaders have criticized the company for failing to rein in misinformation about the election and pandemic. Then you had Jordan and House Republicans say that the company was overreacting and censoring conservatives here. The White House, by the way, is also responding to the Zuckerberg letter, saying they defend their approach to COVID. Quote, our position has been clear and consistent. We believe tech companies and other private actors should take into account the effects their actions have on the American people while making independent choices about the information they present. So that's the White House. Then you have Republicans. You got Zuckerberg sort of trying to draw a line here and an admission when it comes to some of the things that the platform decisions they made back in 2020, 2021. Jill, we've talked about the challenge for these social media companies, billions of users in the case of Facebook and Instagram, and knowing that they have huge influence when it comes to decisions people make, whether it was to get the vaccine, about the pandemic, about elections. And they're really stuck here because they're trying to police misinformation, in some cases disinformation, but also allow free speech on their platform. And you see an admission here that sometimes they don't get it right the first time or the second time, but they're trying their best. And what is a real challenge, because remember, these platforms were not built to be providers of news, but they've turned out to become providers of news, whether you're talking about YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and the like. And so you see here, they're still trying to figure it out as they have now become the go-to place for most of humanity to get their information.
Time now for the speed read from Axios. Prosecutors have filed a new indictment in former President Trump's January 6th case. This accounts for the Supreme Court's ruling earlier this summer that Trump cannot be prosecuted for official acts. Special counsel Jack Smith reframed his charges in light of that ruling, but he didn't drop any of them. The new indictment argues that Trump did not have any official constitutional duties related to certifying the election, meaning that interfering with that process would not be an official act.
Yeah, remember, there's Congress, the House and the Senate deal with that. You have the vice president who oversees that, but nowhere in the Constitution does the president have a role in what went down on January 6th. So the special counsel here, Jack Smith, still believes he has a pretty good case. The original 45-page indictment is now a 36-page indictment. Prosecutors removed a series of allegations because of that Supreme Court ruling earlier this year, specifically the allegations related to Trump trying to make the Justice Department support his false claims about voter fraud. Initially, in the 45-page indictment, in the charging indictment, Trump was accused of conspiring with Jeffrey Clark. He was a loyalist within the Justice Department who had promised to launch investigations into election fraud. But now the Supreme Court has chimed in, and that conversation between Trump and Clark is an official conversation. So he cannot face criminal charges for what is an official conversation, albeit about election interference with Jeffrey Clark. So they have taken that out. And so you had Jeffrey Clark mentioned as an unindicted co-conspirator. He no longer is in there. Still, Trump faces charges. He's denied all those charges. He says that they were legitimate inquiries and questions about election fraud and doesn't believe that anything that he did in the lead up or on January 6th was illegal. A reminder here, even with this new indictment, there is no chance this case will be tried before November, anytime in the next 60 days. And a reminder that if Trump wins in November, he runs the Justice Department. He will drop this case about himself. So the only chance you see this case, even with this new indictment, go forward is a Harris victory in November and a decision by the Justice Department to continue pursuing it next year.
Sticking with politics, it has been more than 5 weeks since Kamala Harris went to the top of the ticket, and finally word that Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, will sit down with CNN for their first joint interview on Thursday. So this will be her first in-depth interview with the journalist since President Biden dropped his bid for a second term and endorsed Harris on July 21st. Her lack of a formal news conference or interview has generated a lot of criticism, specifically from her Republican rivals. Tomorrow's interview fulfills a vow that she made earlier in August to schedule a sit down before the end of the month. And it also signals the next phase of the campaign, where she and Walz will likely face more scrutiny in the final weeks before early voting starts. She's also been preparing for a September 10th debate with her Republican rival, former President Trump.
Yeah, so on that debate, we have a deal. Again, Trump announced on his social media account yesterday, he says he will now participate in that September 10th debate on ABC against Harris if the rules match the CNN debate he had back in June against Biden. So it looks like Trump was in, he was out, he was in, he was out, now he's in again. This 24-hour whirlwind came as he talked about skipping the debate because he says ABC is biased, and a disagreement over some of Harris's new proposals. Ultimately, it appears here nothing will change despite Harris's request. The mics will remain muted while the other person speaks. There will be no studio audience. So this debate happens a week from Tuesday in Philadelphia. For now, we'll see if anything goes down with this debate between now and then. And on that interview, Jill, it's been Republican rivals, and you've also been hearing a drumbeat in the media saying, when are you going to answer questions? And so she and Walz will be sitting down with Dana Bash of CNN. You might know Dana Bash. She co-moderated the Trump-Biden debate with Jake Tapper back June 27th. Actually got some compliments from Trump for her moderation of that debate. I should also note Dana Bash has a close relationship with Doug Emhoff, Kamala Harris's husband. So that may have helped in the pitching, because basically everyone was pitching Harris for the first interview from all the major networks. I spoke to people who were involved in that pitching process, and they were all making their case. Notable here, Jill, they've gone with a joint interview, Walz and Harris together, which means less one-on-one time, less scrutiny of policies. And because ultimately they're sitting next to each other, you got to ask them about their relationship and themselves. So that sort of achieves a certain goal there, is Harris spends less time being scrutinized issue by issue because of the dynamic there of effectively a three-person interview.
Moshe, I saw on Instagram you had asked people how important a sit-down interview with Harris was to them in terms of making a decision about who they were going to vote for. And I thought that what people had to say was pretty fascinating, given that a lot of people were just like, I don't even care what her positions are. I'm voting for her.
Yeah, so you had the Harris supporters who are like, don't mess it up, Kamala. Do not mess it up. Like, I want to vote for you. Like, I don't care if you speak a single unscripted word for the next 60-something days. I mean, literally, Harris supporters are like, I would vote for a rock, a corpse, a dog versus Donald Trump. So those are the hardcore Harris people. We did a poll, by the way. We got about 20,000 respondents. And you saw that a third, this presumably the Harris supporters, say not important for her to do any interview between now and then. Then you had about 40% of the mo.news community saying, yeah, it is important that she does an interview in a traditional sense. And then you had about a quarter who said she should do an interview, but does not need to be with a traditional network. I don't care if it's with the traditional media or an influencer or a podcaster or whatever. So you did see an interesting split there. The Republicans are like, oh my God, she's got to talk. The hardcore Harris people are like, no, she doesn't have to talk. Don't mess this up. We have to win. And then you have the people in the middle, right? You had what we've called the double haters. There's less of them now that she's in the race, but the double haters are like, I don't like either side. I do need to see. You have the undecideds, several percent in the single digits who say, yeah, I'd like to hear more about her policies because we've achieved this whole vibe campaign here. And this is Democrats taking a cue from Trump. Trump's strategy on a few different things is like, I'm going to end inflation. When you ask him how, he goes, because I will. Right? Trump has also said, I'll end the war in Ukraine and Russia in 24 hours. You ask him how he's going to do it. He goes, watch me. So that's effectively what you heard from Trump. So the Kamala Harris people are like, why are we going to issue like long policy papers when the other guy doesn't have to? And so you see Democrats playing that game here. You have, they released their economic speech and then she got scrutiny for it, right? Because she talked about price controls on price gouging, right, for groceries. When on the other end, the Harris people will tell me, well, what's Donald Trump's strategy for lowering grocery prices? Well, he told Fox last week, it's drill, baby, drill. Like he told Fox that he's going to lower grocery prices by drilling for more oil. He tried to draw a line there. It's not clear that there is a line there. The point being that we're now in a campaign, like we're not in 2012 anymore. This ain't 2008. This ain't 2000 with long policy papers from both candidates. In this era, the feeling is, we don't actually have to give voters much in the way of details. They're making a decision based on personality, on vibe, and that's what you've seen here. So this interview set for tomorrow night, Thursday night on CNN. We, of course, will bring you the highlights on Instagram as well as on this podcast and the newsletter on Friday and see if it's mission accomplished. Mission accomplished, Jill. No major foul-ups, no major mistakes, no major faux pas. Ultimately, it's probably a win here for the Harris campaign if they can get the interview done and there's no real major news out of it. And one thing I know we'll be looking for is, where does she differ from Joe Biden? And she has flipped on a number of her positions on 2019. She's gone to the center here from her more progressive positions. I imagine those will be among the questions Dana Bash asks her tomorrow night, which is, wait, where do you stand on this stuff now? And why did you change your view?
All right, Moshe, more political must-see TV. And there is more political news. About 200 former GOP staff members wrote a letter coming out against Donald Trump and throwing their support behind Kamala Harris.
Yes, you got staffers here for George W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, the nominees of 2000, 04, 08, and 12, who Trump does not have a good relation with. Any of them been very critical. They haven't supported him. Of course, McCain passed away a few years ago, but Romney and George W. Bush ain't out there supporting Donald Trump. And so these staffers, some of them senior staff, have had ideological disagreements with both of them, but say that ultimately they will vote for Harris because they feel that Trump 4 more years will irreparably damage the democracy. Jill, several of them actually follow our Instagram account and message me personally to say, hey, I signed on to that letter and we did it in 2020 and we're doing it again. And we, feel honestly that we need to do this because of our viewpoint on Donald Trump, despite the fact that we disagree on some fundamental issues with Harris and Walz. We feel that there's larger issues at stake. The Trump campaign response was, nobody knows any of these people, so we don't care. And the Trump people made a point yesterday of noting they have some Democrats aboard, in particular Robert F. Kennedy Jr., former Democrat, and Tulsi Gabbard. You might know her. She's a former congresswoman from Hawaii, ran for president as a Democrat in 2019. She more recently has moved to the right. She's become a media personality on Fox News, a big supporter of Trump. And so both Kennedy and Gabbard were named yesterday to be on the transition team for Trump should he win.
All right, to some medical news from Bloomberg. Eli Lilly is now selling vials of its blockbuster weight loss drug Zepbound to patients for as little as $399 a month as it works to overcome supply shortages of those wildly popular shots. Patients with a prescription for Zepbound can purchase a month's supply of single-use vials through Lilly's direct-to-consumer site, Through Lilly's direct-to-consumer site that started yesterday, the vials are priced at about half of what the shots cost, with a higher dose going for $550 a month. Zepbound is typically sold in an auto-injector pen, but with the vials, patients are going to need to fill syringes on their own. But it does save Lilly production time, which lets more people get the drug. And this is all part of Lilly's all-hands-on-deck effort to ramp up supply of Zepbound and a similar drug for diabetes called Mounjaro amid widespread shortages. It also offers uninsured patients a cheaper option for weight loss shots that can cost upward of $1,000 a month. Both Lilly and its rival Novo Nordisk have struggled to keep up with incredible demand for these obesity drugs, a market that's expected to reach $130 billion by the end of the decade.
Yeah, completely reimagine the weight loss market globally here. So you have Zepbound, then you got Wegovy from Novo Nordisk. They have gone in and out of supply since they launched. The FDA officially still considers them in shortage. Analysts say that while the lower cost could bring down average Zepbound prices in the near term, the additional volume from vials could prove to be a positive offset for Lilly's sales here. They also put pressure on the manufacturer of Wegovy because they've had difficulty making enough of the active ingredient in their drugs. So there's a bottleneck in the supply here. They're trying to alleviate the shortages through new strategies here because just the demand has been pretty incredible here. And remember, there's also people with diabetes that are also in need of all these drugs beyond the people who are now using it for weight loss purposes. And so as these shortages continue here, the FDA has allowed compounding pharmacies to make copycat versions of the drugs. But they aren't as regulated as brand name drugs, and in some cases have landed people in the hospital. So be cautious.
From Business Insider, Gen Zers are calling in sick to work. They're racking up sick days and taking more mental health days. In the spring of their careers, they're even going on sabbatical. Gen Zers are setting a boundary, and that boundary is not being at work when they're not feeling up to it. The amount of time that people take off from their jobs has risen steadily over the past few years. Dayforce, which is a human resources platform, said sick leave was up by 55% in 2023 compared with 2019 among companies that use its service. Gusto, which is another HR platform, has similar findings. They say data from over 300,000 small and mid-sized businesses that use its platform found that 30% of workers in professional service industries, that means white collar workers, took sick leave last year, a 42% jump from 2019. And this year it says that figure has continued to climb. While workers of all ages are taking more time away, it's really young people who are driving the shift. And there is no single answer for why workers are taking more time off post-pandemic or why Gen Zers in particular feel more inclined to take time away from work than their older counterparts. Experts say it is a bunch of factors. For one, a premium is now being placed culturally on caring for oneself and recognizing that sacrifice does not necessarily pay off.
I wonder how many of those days are being taken on Fridays and Mondays, Jill.
I'd guess a lot.
Got to ask the people at Gusto about that. They found that the 25 to 34-year-old crowd is taking more sick time than older workers. They also found that people 35 and under had a 30% increase in sick leave since 2019, compared to a 16% increase for people over the age of 35. Younger remote workers are also taking more sick time. And the same is true of extended leave. Gusto found that at the start of the year, workers 22 to 26 years old are the most likely group to have taken a sabbatical, followed by 27 to 34-year-olds. So you see here this generational shift towards balancing work-life, balancing mental health. I remember just as the Gen Zers are coming into the workforce, Jill, at CBS, when I was still there a few years back, it was the first time I was hearing as a boss, I need a mental health day. Or like, I'm going to go see my therapist and need, a half day, being very open about it in a way that previous generations were not. So it's not that you need a physical ailment anymore, a sore throat, sniffles, etc. But mental health days also significant. People missing work because they just feel overwhelmed or burned out or need a reset day. So you really see a recalibration here in the workforce generationally. And it'll be really interesting to see how this unfolds in the years to come. and what it means to businesses, productivity, profits, etc.
What's interesting is that people feel comfortable saying it's a mental health day. In the past, you would just say, I don't feel well, or come up with a different excuse. But the fact that there's people who are now comfortable saying that, I think really does show a major cultural shift.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're just at the beginning of it here. And there's a lot of bosses of an older generation that are seeing it and trying to figure out how to best navigate it. But ultimately, you also need to be competitive. And if your competitors and other businesses are allowing that sort of thing, being open to that sort of thing, et cetera, you gotta be the same way.
Talk to me when we get the entire month of August off. Like they do in Europe. Yes. Yeah. That's what I'm waiting for.
The Americans have always been workaholics and never taken our vacation days and sick days. So the Gen Zers are like, maybe it's about time a generation decides to do that. At the same time, we're not anywhere near close what our friends in Germany and France, etc. get.
From Sports Illustrated, the first day of the U.S. Open on Monday brought in the biggest crowd for a single day in the history of the major event. A record-breaking 74,641 fans attended the tournament at Flushing Meadows in New York City throughout the day and night sessions. The day session saw a total of 42,886 fans. That is the second highest attendance number for a day session in U.S. Open history, but the night session, headlined by Novak Djokovic and Francis Tiafoe, brought in a record of 31,775 fans. Quite the way to start the final major of the tennis season.
So this year's Open is missing two men's legends, right? Rafael Nadal, Andy Murray. Nadal withdrew from the tournament because he's not feeling 100% ready. Murray retired from tennis after his Olympics loss last month. But this doesn't seem to hurt the attendance numbers. Day 2 of the U.S. Open was headlined by big names like Carlos Alcaraz and Jessica Pegula. It'll be interesting to see the attendance rates here for the rest of the tournament. Jill, I was able to get to one of the matches last year, hoping to get out to the Open sometime in the next 2 weeks.
And sticking with tennis from the New York Post, 16-year-old Californian Iva Jovic pulled off a stunning U.S. Open upset Monday when she downed Poland's Magda Linette, a 2023 Australian Open semifinalist, in straight sets. Jovic won 6-4, 6-3 to set up a match with the world's number 31 player later this afternoon in the second round. Jovic is the youngest American to win a match in the U.S. Open main draw since 2000.
Yeah, she was the 5th-ranked junior in the world. She earned her way into the tournament by winning the Billie Jean King Girls National Championship earlier this month. She says, I just had a plan about what I was going to do before we started, and there weren't that many needs for crazy adjustments because it was just going well. So kind of just sticking to that. So we're going to watch her. That's very exciting. Another American we're watching, Coco Gauff. She won in her first round, and then she's going to be playing again tonight in the second round, Jill.
And finally, from The Independent, Oasis have announced their long-awaited reunion tour. It is 15 years after the infamous backstage bust-up between brothers Noel and Liam Gallagher. The British group was one of the defining rock bands of the 90s, and they split in 2009 after a massive feud in Paris. They have not played together since. In a highly anticipated message, the band announced a run of 14 shows in the UK and Ireland next summer, saying, quote, the guns have fallen silent, the stars have aligned, the great wait is over. Come see, it will not be televised. Tickets go on sale Saturday.
You ever refer to fights with your sibling as the guns have fallen silent, Jill?
Never. And I've been trying to figure out why they don't like each other. And it's like nasty. The things that they've said about each other.
Yeah, like it just
one of them
goes
said
back.
they liked their mom until she gave birth to the other one.
I mean, they literally physically fought at times. It was sort of part of enjoying Oasis music was enjoying the rivalry or watching the rivalry between these brothers, and then things totally fell apart. But there have been hints in recent months that they were ready to get back together. Noel offered some praise for his younger brother. They did both have successful solo careers since their split, and they last performed back in 2009, as you said. At the time, they actually surprised fans because they were like, okay, we'll see them perform tomorrow. And they're like, nope. And it's been 15 years since then. So a lot of folks very excited about this. They had a number of hits back then, Wonderwall and a few others. All right, now time for On This Day in History. On this day in 1963, About 200,000 people march on Washington. It's an event that became a high point for the civil rights movement, remembered for Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. On this day in 1996, the 15-year marriage between Prince Charles and Princess Diana officially ends as the final divorce decree is issued. And a bit of music history here. On this day in 1970, turning 54 years old today, I'll Be There by the Jackson 5. On this day in 1973, Marvin Gaye releases his album, Let's Get It On. The answer to your clue from up top, turning 34 years old today, Mama Said Knock You Out by LL Cool J, who's gone on to quite a career. I remember using him a lot at CBS as a announcer and Grammys host, etc.
And he's also had a pretty good acting career. I happen to be a huge fan of the movie Last Holiday with Queen Latifah. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Something about it. It's like one of my favorite romantic comedies.
Jill, LL Cool J trivia. Do you know what LL Cool J stands for?
Ladies Love Cool J.
Ladies Love Cool James.
Ladies Love Cool James.
Yeah.
Close. And
finally, on this day in 2003, this is back when the MTV Video Music Awards were a big cultural moment. On this day, Madonna, dressed as a groom, kisses her brides, Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, for those of you that remember that sort of pre-YouTube, pre-social media moment.
At the time, 2 decades ago, that was viewed as extremely risque. And Moshe, did you know that Jennifer Lopez was actually supposed to be involved instead of Christina Aguilera, but Lopez had to drop out to film a movie, so they tapped Aguilera instead. Another piece of trivia that I think is of unique interest to our age bracket. Don't say you don't learn anything here on the Mo News podcast. No, you learn a lot. Ladies love Cool James. You're learning about, media censorship, interviews, and tennis. Yeah, we had a lot for you today, right? Yes. And with that, let's wrap it up. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. See you back here tomorrow, everybody.